Your credit card may be making debt feel safer than it actually is. Millions of Americans carry credit card balances, and many of them already know those balances are expensive. But here's the strange part. Knowing debt is expensive doesn't automatically make paying it off feel urgent. And that's where the real story begins. Because credit card debt isn't always created by one reckless shopping spree. Sometimes it's dinner, a car repair, groceries, a medical expense, or a bill that arrived before the paycheck did. Other times, it's discretionary spending that slowly became normal. And sometimes, it's a combination of both. The Federal Reserve's latest household survey found that 37% of U.S. adults carried a credit card balance at least once during the previous year. Among people who had credit cards, 45% reported carrying a balance at some point. And by the second quarter of 2026, U.S. credit card balances had reached roughly $1.26 trillion. So this isn't simply a story about people who don't understand money. It's a story about what happens when financial pressure meets human psychology. And one of the most important psychological effects starts with something incredibly simple. The moment you buy something with cash, the cost is obvious. You hand over the money. Your wallet gets lighter. The transaction is finished. With a credit card, that connection can feel different. You can spend $80 at a restaurant, put the card back in your wallet, and walk out without seeing $80 disappear from your checking account. The financial consequence has been separated from the moment of consumption, and that separation matters. Imagine you're looking at something that costs $800. If you had to hand over $800 in cash right now, you might hesitate. You might ask yourself whether you really need it. You might put it back. You might wait until payday. But change the question. Instead of asking, do I want to spend $800? You ask, can I handle another $40 a month? Suddenly, the decision feels completely different. The product didn't change. The price didn't change. Your financial situation didn't change. Only the way the cost was presented changed. And this is where credit cards become psychologically powerful. They can transform one large financial decision into a series of smaller decisions. You're no longer emotionally confronting the entire purchase. You're confronting the next payment. And the next payment usually feels much easier to handle. And this is where another psychological effect appears. This is closely related to a behavioral concept called temporal discounting. People tend to place greater psychological weight on costs and rewards happening now than on those happening later. A cost today feels immediate. A cost spread across months can feel distant. That's one reason a purchase can feel affordable when the cost is divided into manageable payments. But there's an even more interesting effect hiding inside your credit card statement. Look at the balance, then look at the minimum payment. The balance might be several $1,000s. The minimum payment might be a relatively small number, and your eyes naturally gravitate toward the smaller number. That isn't just a random observation. Research on U.S. credit card accounts has found evidence that minimum payment amounts can act as psychological anchors, influencing how much people choose to repay. In one large study, 29% of accounts regularly made payments at or near the minimum. The researchers found that at least some of this behavior was consistent with anchoring, rather than being explained entirely by financial constraints. Think about what that means psychologically. If your statement says you owe $5,000, that's the actual problem. But if your attention keeps getting pulled toward a much smaller minimum payment, that smaller number can become the number your brain uses to judge whether everything is okay. And suddenly the question becomes, can I afford this payment? Instead of, how quickly can I eliminate this $5,000 balance? Those are completely different questions, and the first one can make a serious debt problem feel manageable. But there's another reason debt can become difficult to escape. The purchase itself eventually disappears from your attention. Think about something you bought 6 months ago. You might remember the experience. You might remember the restaurant, the vacation, the electronics, the clothes. But you may not emotionally connect that purchase with the payment appearing on your statement today. The consumption happened in the past. The payment is happening now. The brain doesn't always experience those two events as strongly connected as they actually are, financially. And that creates a strange situation. Yesterday's decision can quietly become today's obligation. Then tomorrow's purchase gets added on top of it. And suddenly, you're not just paying for what you want today. You're paying for what you wanted months ago while creating another bill for your future self. This is why credit card debt can grow without one dramatic moment. It can happen through accumulation. $40 here, $75 there, $100 somewhere else. None of those purchases individually feels like a financial disaster, but together they can create a balance that becomes increasingly difficult to eliminate. And there's an important distinction here. Not everyone carrying a balance is spending irresponsibly. The Federal Reserve's research found that increases in credit card balances were much larger among adults who reported struggling financially than among those who said they were living comfortably. That changes the way we should think about this problem.
Sometimes credit cards aren't funding a lifestyle. They're functioning as a bridge. The refrigerator breaks. The car needs repairs. The medical bill arrives. Groceries become more expensive. The emergency fund isn't large enough. And suddenly the choice isn't necessarily between debt and responsible spending. Sometimes it's between debt and an immediate financial crisis. That's why simply telling everyone with credit card debt to stop spending misses part of the story. Some people need behavioral changes. Others need more income. Some need lower expenses. Some need an emergency fund. And many need several of those things simultaneously. But once a balance exists, another psychological process can begin: normalization. At first, owing $1,000 might feel uncomfortable. Then the balance becomes $2,000. You keep making the payments. Eventually, the debt starts feeling less like a temporary problem and more like a normal part of your financial life. You stop thinking, I have $5,000 of debt, and start thinking, I have a $150 payment. That sounds like a small difference. Psychologically, it's enormous. The first statement describes the problem. The second describes the routine. And routines are much easier to tolerate than problems. That's why debt doesn't always feel urgent.
There isn't necessarily an alarm going off every morning. Instead, there is a payment, then another payment, then another. Nothing dramatic happens. And because nothing dramatic happens, the brain can conclude that everything must be okay. Meanwhile, interest continues accumulating, and the balance can remain in the background. This is also why rewards can complicate the picture. Cashback, points, travel miles, welcome bonuses. These benefits can be genuinely valuable when a card is used responsibly. But psychologically, rewards can change the way a purchase feels. Instead of experiencing the transaction entirely as spending, your brain can also experience it as getting something back. You aren't just spending $100. You're earning points. You're getting cash back. You're working toward a free flight. Again, that isn't automatically bad.
The problem appears when the reward becomes a justification for spending more than you otherwise would, because earning a small percentage back doesn't make expensive revolving debt cheap. You can receive rewards from a purchase while simultaneously paying interest on the balance carrying that purchase. The reward is immediate and visible. The interest cost can be delayed and spread across time. Then there's lifestyle inflation. When income rises, spending often has room to rise with it. A nicer apartment, a newer car, more restaurants, more subscriptions, more convenience, more travel. None of these things are automatically irresponsible. The problem is what happens when your lifestyle expands faster than your financial foundation. Credit makes that possible because you don't always need to have the cash before making the purchase. You can consume first and deal with the financial consequences later. That creates a dangerous illusion. You can look financially comfortable while being financially fragile. The outside world sees the car, the vacation, the clothes, the restaurants. It doesn't see the balance behind them. And because we naturally compare ourselves with what other people display, debt can become socially normalized. If everyone around you appears to be spending the same way, your own spending doesn't feel extreme. It feels normal. But normal and sustainable aren't the same thing. So how do you break the psychological cycle? The first step is simple. Stop judging your debt by the monthly payment. Look at the total balance. Look at the interest rate. Look at how much interest you're actually paying. And look at how long the balance could remain if you continue making relatively small payments. Make the invisible cost visible.
Because once the entire problem is visible, your brain has something much more meaningful to evaluate. And there's an important lesson here about minimum payments. Don't confuse the minimum required payment with the payment that makes financial sense for your situation. The minimum is designed to keep the account current. It isn't automatically designed to get you out of debt quickly.
Research has found that the way payoff information is presented can itself influence repayment choices, which shows just how much framing can matter. The second step is to reconnect the purchase with its true cost. Before putting something on a credit card, don't only ask, "Can I afford the monthly payment?" Ask, "Would I still buy this if I had to pay the entire amount today?" That question changes the psychological experience. An $800 purchase becomes an $800 decision, not a $40 decision. A $2,000 purchase becomes a $2,000 decision, not a comfortable monthly payment.
And that doesn't mean you should never use credit. Credit cards can be useful financial tools when balances are paid in full and spending remains controlled. The point isn't to fear credit. The point is to understand what credit does to your perception of spending. Because once you understand the psychological mechanism, you can use the tool without letting the tool change your behavior. And if you're already carrying a balance, the goal isn't shame, it's visibility.